Why would she want to risk her career? I mean, this is career suicide. She's done.
These people are funded by the people who want advocacy research. They don't want the accuracy. They want the advocacy research.
Did she get fired?
Oh, no. Of course not. It's an old story, money and power.
Are you innocent until proven guilty? Or guilty until proven innocent? Or will you be guilty at all costs when they suppress evidence which proves your innocence and fabricate evidence of guilt using a financially motivated expert witness in junk science?
Even though we live in a system where, according to the law, you are innocent until proven guilty, proving yourself innocent has become more difficult than ever as the courts continue to confirm financially motivated activists as expert witnesses who testify to junk science and are more interested in using their academic credentials to create fortune and fame for themselves than they are in offering an objective and unbiased report.
Forensic science plays an important role in criminal convictions. Prosecutors often complain about a so-called CSI effect, where jurors expect to see forensic evidence in every case. The problem is, not all forensic science is as reliable as we've become accustomed to believe. A report in 2009 by the National Academy of Sciences found that many forensic sciences do not meet the fundamental requirements of science. And a report last year by a Presidential Science Council agreed, saying that expert witnesses have often overstated the value of their evidence, going far beyond what the relevant science can justify. And that's the thing here. It's not that all forensic science is bad, because it's not. But too often, its reliability is dangerously overstated.
Dr. Carrie Samsel is one of those activists who use a medical degree and complex language to create credibility in the courts. Dr. Samsel has been blindly believing any woman who accuses a man of rape for more than a decade.
Dr. Samsel is a #MeToo activist, an outspoken third-wave feminist, and a misandrous social justice warrior. She advocates for government funding to promote rape hysteria, fund her specialized clinic, and to pad her personal bank balance.
She's achieved local and national media attention for her outspoken and often hyperbolic claims about men who sexually assault women and intimate partner violence perpetrated by men against women. National media exposure wasn't enough. She wanted to go global with her feminist activism, so she attended the Feminem Women's Idea Exchange in New York. Let's take a peek inside.
So how do you become a high-impact speaker?
You basically have to figure out what your superpower is. You need to trust that you're worthy. You want to have an impact and you want to have influence.
You find every kind of opportunity out there, regardless if you know the information or not. But what I do think is
if you end up successful in this, you're going to be asked to talk about that over and over and over again.
Dr. Samsel has found her superpower as a controversial keynote speaker at medical and law enforcement conferences in Scotland, the Netherlands, Puerto Rico, Phoenix, Sydney, Australia, New Orleans, Indianapolis, Miami, Tucson, the list goes on. Dr. Samsel's media popularity has landed her speaking engagements teaching district attorneys and crown attorneys about drug-facilitated sexual assault at prosecutor schools all over the country, and she's been confirmed as an expert witness by the Superior Court of Justice. Now, it's important to understand that according to the rules of admission, to be qualified as an expert witness, your evidence should be expected to be impartial in order to be admissible. There must not be any bias or even appearance of bias. So Dr. Samsel had to tone down her advocacy just a little in order to look more objective. Because according to the law, expert evidence must be excluded if the influence, prejudice, or bias of the evidence outweighs the evidence's reliability. In other words, if what Dr. Samsel says is so prejudicial that it seems unreliable and untruthful, she would lose her role as a paid expert witness. Let's try and establish Dr. Samsel's objective credibility and impartiality by watching her speak at the CODA conference for medical professionals and advocates, where she was paid to speak last year in Melbourne, Australia.
Sexual assault is a devastatingly common entity, affecting 1 in 3 women worldwide in their lifetime.
Unbelievable. And by unbelievable, I mean you shouldn't believe it, because it's not true. The World Health Organization article that Dr. Samsel refers to shows that what she said in her keynote speech to all those medical professionals and advocates isn't true. 1 in 3 women experience violence in their lifetime, not sexual assault. Now, it's important to define what violence is here because according to the Oxford English Dictionary, violence is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. But according to Statistics Canada, violence could also be somebody who called you names that made you feel bad, or was harassing you with text messages, or threatened to harm your pet. While these things aren't nice, they make up more than 50% of the data used by Statistics Canada to conclude that women are the victims of intimate partner violence.
So, according to Dr. Samsel, you can now rape someone with a text message. And if you are jealous of your partner, you are now a rapist. And calling a woman crazy or stupid is now considered sexual assault.
Can you rape someone with a text message? When Dr. Samsel conflates text messages and name calling with sexual violence, and then fails to tell you that she's using these numbers to represent rapes, it sounds like she's blatantly lying. Classic group figureheads like Dr. Samsel know they're very rarely fact-checked, and they commonly use their academic credentials and social platforms to create both legal and social justice credibility. Sometimes activists who become paid public speakers will play fast and loose with the truth. It's not possible that a medical doctor is deliberately misstating the facts for dramatic effect to try and push her political agenda, is it? The scary thing is, Dr. Samsel's not alone. Dr. Jacqueline C. Campbell is her American counterpart who uses similar exaggerated claims masquerading as factual information. More about that in a minute, but right now let's get back to Dr. Carrie Samsel. Let's listen further and see what she says next.
Sexual assault is a devastatingly common entity, affecting 1 in 3 women worldwide in their lifetime. This is more common than breast cancer, than cardiac disease, and stroke.
This is also not true, and given her audience of medical professionals, it couldn't even be mistaken as hyperbolic. The statistics tell a very different story. According to a study published in the American Journal of Public Health, ironically co-authored by Dr. Samsel herself, 52,780 cases of sexual assault were treated by Ontario doctors over 15 years, or an average of 3,533 cases of sexual assault were treated each year, if her statistics are true. When you compare sexual assaults to breast cancer in the same jurisdiction, breast cancer is 300% more common. When you compare sexual assaults to heart disease is 959% more common. And when you compare sexual assaults to strokes are 700% more common. We even tried to isolate for gender in case Dr. Samsel meant to say heart disease and strokes in women, but no statistics anywhere would even come close to supporting her claims. So when I hear Dr. Carrie Samsel say,
This is more common than breast cancer, than cardiac disease, and stroke,
I start to wonder. If she was willing to falsify information and statistics in front of hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, what else would she be willing to say to support her cause?
After a few years of practicing her superpower, Dr. Samsel returned to Feminist, not to learn, but to teach and build fortune and fame as the world's leading spokesperson on sexual assault.
Talk about sexual assault and its impact in the emergency department, the reality of the numbers of what we see, the responsibility that we have as emerged physicians, as well as the response that we can have. So let's talk about sexual assault. Worldwide, the statistics is it's over 95% women.
As you can see, the data that Dr. Samsel is using is gathered from the Women Stats Project, a women's rights advocacy group, which gets funding from the National Institute of Health's $41.7 billion discretionary research fund, which gets its funding from you. The US is yellow, meaning rape is not uncommon as indicated by the yellow color in the legend. Canada is green, meaning rape is unusual, slightly better than the US, according to this first graphic.
It's slightly different in different jurisdictions if you look at things. So us fellow Canadians up here, there are a slightly larger percentage of men who are reporting, and this is what the US is looking like. So anybody here from South Dakota? you're having a bit of an issue. Feel free to come talk to me. So,
Despite the fact that this graph has no title or subject matter, no source data, and no time period for reporting, not to mention it looks like it was produced with Windows 97, Dr. Samsel's data contradicts the findings from the Women's Stats Project, which shows Canada as the lowest risk of rape in the world. Dr. Samsel's graph shows Canada as 150% to 200% worse than South Dakota and Alaska, and even worse than sub-Saharan Africa, where rapes are endemic, the worst on the planet. We originally intended to use research which proved that this data may have been subject to bias, but that seemed too easy. Instead, we chose to use Dr. Samsel's own data, which showed more sloppy inconsistencies each time we reviewed her presentation. The United States was divided into 4 categories, based on this map, which was apparently from the FBI's 2012 crime estimates of reported rapes. We have not been able to verify that the FBI had anything to do with this graphic, or the data it represents. The map indicates 0 to 20.9 reported rapes per 100,000 people, presumably as very low reported cases of rape, and they are marked in yellow. Next was 21 to 40.9 cases per 100,000 people, which is presumably low, marked in orange. That was followed by 41 to 60.9 reported rapes per 100,000 people, presumably categorized as medium-risk states, marked in red, and finally 61 to 80 reported rapes per 100,000 people, in an angry crimson color, showing the highest risk states, South Dakota and Alaska. The medium and high-risk states make up 6.5% of the US population, meaning that very low-risk states and low-risk states make up 93.5% of the population, which the Women's Stats Project classifies as rape is not uncommon. Here's another way to look at the data. By the way, we added an FBI logo to make Dr. Samsel's data look more official. In Alaska and South Dakota, which comprise less than 1% of the US population, where reported rapes are the worst in the country, rape doesn't affect 8% of people, it doesn't even affect 0.8%. Rapes are reported by 0.08% of people. In the worst case scenario, you might call reported rapes not uncommon, like the Women's Stats Project does, or you might also call them very rare. In Michigan, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, which make up 6% of America's population, reported rapes dropped to 0.06%. In the other 44 states, the risk of rape drops significantly below 0.01%. You might call this extremely rare.
Another study was done by the CDC in 2004, and they found that 57,000 patients present to emergency departments for the direct complaint of sexual assault. I don't necessarily agree with that.
So according to the CDC, 57,000 people go to emergency rooms every year, reporting sexual assault. Also according to the CDC, there were 110 million visits to the ER in the same year, making the percentage of people going to the emergency room to report a sexual assault 0.05%.
There are massive flaws in this methodology, but that is the number that everybody quotes as the number of annual visits for sexual assault to emergency departments in the US. But we know that the stats are about 1 in 10 people that are coming in with disclosure.
You may remember that Dr. Samsel presented this graph, but she didn't present her Canadian data on a map like the US data was presented. So we took Dr. Samsel's graph and mapped it, so you could compare the countries, side by side. You may want to pause now, to look at the data scales, and confirm that our Canadian map has an identical data scale to both the American map and Dr. Samsel's graph. According to Dr. Samsel, Quebec and Prince Edward Island have sexual assault rates equaling the highest number of rapes in the USA. Then, Dr. Samsel's graph states that Ontario, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick have sexual assault rates that surpass the worst of the United States, with between 81 and 100 rapes per 100,000 people, more than double the US national average. But it gets worse. According to Dr. Samsel's graph, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and Alberta have sexual assault rates that more than triple the US national average, and Manitoba and Saskatchewan more than quadruple the rape data in the worst of the United States. If you're wondering why Dr. Sampsell's data contradicts itself, if you're wondering why Dr. Sampsell is inflating the actual statistics from the FBI, the CDC, and the Women's Advocacy Group by a 200-fold increase, it's because she thinks no one is paying attention. She thinks no one will question a keynote speaker with a PhD. She thinks you're a complete idiot, and she can't get hundreds of millions of dollars in government funding for an affliction which only affects 0.05% of people. So, she has to lie and fabricate a crisis that doesn't exist. But it gets worse.
And there was another interesting study that was looking at that was saying that when they did this was a Justice Department study where they looked at people's health history, and they surveyed people in the waiting room of emergency departments, and they asked as one of the questions, how many of you have actually experienced sexual violence over the course of your lifetime? And that's the number on the bottom. So 50% on average of people who are sitting in your emergency department waiting room have experienced sexual assault. Because it is an overwhelming victimization of women, so 95% worldwide, about 85 to 90% in North America, usually the perpetrator that is doing this to them is a man. Sorry for the few dudes that are in the audience here. But
after months of research, there is no evidence that this survey exists anywhere.
Wow. A Center for Disease Control study of an urban emergency department waiting room found that 50% of people there had either sexual assault or intimate partner violence as a contributing feature of their current visit. Would be a really striking statistic if it were true. And I want to add that place to my list of places I don't want to live. Your citation doesn't seem to lead to this study though, and a quick search didn't pull up anything similar either. Could the specific trial please be cited, or am I just missing it? Passing along from Dr. Sampsell.
Hi, Justin. I've been looking for this as well. It was a CDC-done study, and it seems that the CDC has changed its information on their official website. The research article was always accessible from there previously. I will keep digging to see if I have an archived copy. It was a well-done study, and it is a shame if it isn't accessible anymore. Thanks, and I will send this along if I can find a copy. Carrie.
I'll update when we get the proper citation sorted.
15 months later, Kari Sampsell still hasn't replied to medical researcher Nick Zelt, and left Dr. Justin Morgenstern in a compromising position after he referenced Sampsell's work in his post. The reason why she never found an archived copy is because the study never existed. In fact, after contacting the CDC, they confirmed that their surveys have never included interviewing people in emergency waiting rooms, and the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey is only conducted via random digit dial telephone surveys.
But wait! Even if we assume that the Justice Department actually conducts surveys about sexual assault history by sending officers to hospital ER waiting rooms, we know that both women and men go to the emergency room for a variety of reasons. If 55% of people in the emergency room are women, and 45% of people in the emergency room are men, and according to Dr. Sampsell, up to 55% of people in the ER have been raped, then Dr. Sampsell is telling you that between 97 and 100% of women are rape victims. She is multiplying 0.05% reported by CDC statistics and confirmed by the Women's Stats report, not by a factor of 200, by a factor of 2,000.
So you're going to be the superhero girl that's going to raise education and awareness in your emerge. You're going to let people know that 50% of the people that are sitting in your waiting room have had sexual violence in their past. And because maybe your ortho colleagues are not always seeing people that have fallen on the ground because they've hurt themselves by accident. Sometimes it's because someone has put them there. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It is 6 months from now. So what can you do to go back to your community, your hospital, your political advocacy, whatever you feel is right for you? What can you do?
Is this intentional statistical fraud?
Sometimes it's not intentional fraud, but rather something much more inadvertent, which is the kind of bias that can come from feeling like you're part of a side, part of a team, that you're attached to the prosecution, and you want to get the bad guy.
One of the first things a medical student needs to do before they become licensed as a doctor is to take the Hippocratic Oath. And one of the promises within that oath is, first, do no harm.
Of course, no physician should set out to do something that will only be accompanied by predictable and preventable harm. We don't need an oath to convince us of that.
Dr. Sampsell's medical counterparts have acknowledged that this problem runs so deep that they have written books like The Hippocratic Myth and The Hippocratic Oath, or just Hypocrisy. These books address the problem with doctors who get more involved with political advocacy and less involved with treating patients.
Were the judges who confirmed Dr. Sampsell so willfully blind, or so scared of media backlash, or so socio-politically influenced that they've simply let this proverbial fox into the legal henhouse?
Is that judges often rely on precedent to decide what to allow in front of a jury. So if a particular discipline has been in court before, it is likely that a judge will admit it again. All of which means that, as the co-founder of the Innocence Project points out, decisions about the validity of science are being made by people who don't necessarily know much about it.
Historically, we had a situation where two scientifically illiterate lawyers argued the bona fides of scientific evidence before a scientifically illiterate judge, so that 12 scientifically illiterate jurors could decide the weight of that evidence.
And if you think about it, that's absolutely terrifying. Trials can often be a situation where no one really knows what they're doing. It's like a cooking competition for toddlers, hosted by a stray cat and judged by goats. Oh, the tuna was undercooked and covered in cold spaghetti sauce. You then, for some reason, covered the whole dish in Honey Nut Cheerios. I loved it.
The last line of the Hippocratic Oath is,
If I carry out this oath, and break it not, may I gain forever reputation among all people, for my life, and for my art. But if I break it, and forswear myself, may the opposite befall me.
Dr. Sampsell has broken her Hippocratic Oath and ignored data from the FBI, the CDC, and even other women's advocacy groups, all of whose data correlates. Her 2,000-fold amplification of official data, for the purpose of additional government funding, has earned her millions of dollars and put innocent people in prison. Her feminist political and social media advocacy, coupled with spreading malicious disinformation about a rape crisis that doesn't exist to hundreds of thousands of new doctors and medical students, should result in the seizure and revocation of Dr. Sampsell's medical license. This is the first of 4 videos which deal with the judicial misconduct and medical fraud of Dr. Kari Sampsell, including how both she and others like her are profiting from the false rape culture hysteria, how she falsified forensic evidence under oath, her noble cause corruption, how she incentivizes false rape allegations for profit, what this costs the taxpayer, and what you can do to make a change today. To watch part 2, click the link below, or to watch the full video, commercial-free, click the full video link.
A woman's greatest strength is her facade of weakness. A man's greatest weakness is his facade of strength.
Innocent men pay the price of false accusations and wrongful convictions. Families are destroyed, lives and finances are ruined. Take a stand and raise your voice for equality. Visit www.metoo.life, that's metwo.life, to sign the petition and donate now. Seriously, please do it now. This problem isn't going to fix itself.